All right. Hello and welcome to the Parsha class. A day late, but actually a very auspicious day to learn Torah. It is now Zayin Adar, the yahrzeit of Moshe Rabbeinu, from whom we have the Torah, and our first teacher. And so this is a great time to learn some Torah. Um, Whoa, what was that? I don't know. But anyway, a lot of noises. Either way, we're going to learn tonight, God willing, uh, if nobody minds, in the merit of a refuah shalema for Chaim Yitzchak Daniel ben Batya Ilana. Should have a refuah shalema. B'soch kol Yisrael. But a lot of reminders. This is the time of the year when we have a lot of reminders. One reminder, ironically, is that this is Parsha Zachor this week on Shabbat. At our community, we have a few opportunities for everybody to participate in hearing the Torah. The Torah reading, at least of Zachor, is, according to, as far as I know, almost all opinions, it is from the Torah. It is a commandment from the Torah. Everybody is required to hear the Torah read this week, man, woman, child. Oh, okay, not child, but unless they're 12 or 13, depending on their gender. Uh, and so it is an important mitzvah, and it should not be pushed off. Because of COVID, there are certain restrictions. I understand, but we're trying to make it more convenient for people. So there's going to be the usual Torah reading. I think we start at 8:30 Shabbat morning. Should be up to the Torah reading around 9:30. We should be up to Zachor around 10. So around 10 should be Parshat Zachor. For those of you who want to hear it in shul, there will be another reading at 11 a.m. at Rabbi Hollander's backyard, and you can fulfill the mitzvah that way. If that doesn't work for you, about 15 minutes before Mincha, we'll have another reading in shul again. That'll be around 5. So again, 10, 11, or 5 on Shabbat, you'll be able to hear Parshat Zachor. Another opportunity, possibly, there are opinions that you can fulfill your obligation by hearing the Torah read on Purim morning. There is mention of Amalek in the Torah reading before the Megillah reading. And so there are opinions you can fulfill your obligation that way. Certainly, if you're concerned about health reasons, certainly you can be lenient in this particular instance for sure. Any questions about that? So that's one reminder. Another reminder is that we're in the midst of our biggest fundraiser of the year, our Mishloach Manot fundraiser, and if you have not yet ordered, this is we're cutting it kind of close. A week from now is Purim, and so you want to order that soon. There'll be another email hopefully sent out tonight with the order form. Another important reminder is Matanot Levyonim. If you have not yet worked out a system with me, how you want to pay for, remember you have an obligation to fulfill on Purim. 2 people have to be fed enough money, need to be given enough money to fulfill their obligation of a meal. And so that is an obligation on everybody as well. And so work that out with me in private. Last but not least, last reminder that I have is, yes, sign up for Megillah reading. We have a sign up sheet for that. We don't want to have too many people. I mean, we would love to have too many people, but not at the same time. So we want to make shifts in order to keep everybody healthy this particular year. So please, by all means, come to Megillah reading, but sign up first so we know who's coming. That's going to be in the email tonight as well. All right, I think those are all the reminders. And now let's get into the Torah, the Holy Torah. So the Parsha this week is Teruma. There are a total of several Parshiot that have to do with the building, the construction of the Mishkan. That's the portable tabernacle that the Jews built that went with them wherever they went in the desert, which was later established as a permanent building in the Beit Hamikdash, the first one, and then after that was destroyed, the second one, and God willing, soon, after that one was destroyed 2,000 years ago, we hope for the rebuilding of the third Beit Hamikdash, B'mheira v'yameinu. So all of that started with the Mishkan that we begin learning about in this week's Parsha. The Parsha goes into great detail, talking about how each thing is built, and nevertheless, often there is the refrain that Hashem says, build it the way I told you to build it, the pictures that I showed you on the mountain. So one of the famous questions is, what do you mean? It's pretty clear how to build it just from the psukim themselves. What do I need a picture for? And so the reason is because there are differences of opinion about the psukim. For example, the famous argument about what shape the menorah was. So this particular book that I have here, the Mishkan and the Holy Garment. So they have here an illustration of the, let me see if I can see it, of the three major opinions of how the menorah looked. We have Rashi and Rambam. We have the Tosfot. No, Tosfot is the rounder one. There's differences of opinion. It doesn't say whether the stems are straight or bent. You would think from seeing the mural, not the mural, the etching on the famous Titus, Ark of Titus. There, the Jewish people are carrying the kalim, the vessels of the Beit Hamikdash. They're carrying them to Babylonia. So over there, it's clearly a rounded menorah that artist sketched, but we don't know when that arch was built. We don't know who the artist was, and we don't know if he'd actually seen the Jews carrying these things. Oh no, this is not Babylonia. This was yeah, I guess it was Babylonia, or was it Rome already? Either way, and anyway, that doesn't have any necessary. The menorah that was there was not necessarily the same menorah that was in the Mishkan, so we don't know really the shape. So, despite the fact that there's all these verses describing how they're built, there's certain details that are left out, and that's why a picture, a physical representation, was necessary. Which is why Hashem showed Moshe some sort of picture of what the menorah should look like. And not just the menorah, but other things as well, and that's how that goes. Okay, so let's, without any further ado, let me open up. Just a moment. I neglected to open up the source sheet on my computer. Let me make sure I got that going right there, and then I can share the screen with everybody. And let's see if that works. Share screen. Okay. Double click. All right. Baruch Hashem. Safari is looking for donations. Always a very good cause. A lot of Torah has been learned through them. All right. So let's, without any further ado, let's get started with some of our questions. I sent out the questions yesterday. I hope everybody got them. So the first question. So let's look at the pasuk. The second pasuk in the parsha says, "Deber el bnei Yisrael v'yikhu li truma." So tell the Jewish people to yikhu, really take for me truma, gifts, me'et kol ish, from every person, asher yidavenu libo, whoever wants to give. There wasn't any particular amount that everybody had to give. People just gave of their own free will and volition. Tikhu et trumati, so that they should all take these gifts, and all of these gifts should be accepted for the building of the Mishkan. The details of what those gifts are said later on. But this is the first introductory pasuk. The question that is posed by several commentaries, including the Beit Halevi, is why is Truma following right at the heels of Mishpatim? Again, Mishpatim was a parsha we just had, and that parsha was laws, civil laws. What happens when my cow gores your cow? What happens if a fire rages? What happens if I break your utensils? All these kinds of civil cases, and then all of a sudden we're talking about building the Mishkan. So what's the connection? Is there a connection? Oh, sorry. Yeah, let's make sure everybody's muted.
Did we figure out about the headphones for this? No, I didn't.
Do we not hear me? All right. Okay. Okay. So again, so we have, why is it that Truma follows at the heels of Mishpatim? So the Beit Halevi writes that this parsha is after Mishpatim, that you want to start a parsha that has to do with giving gifts. You want to have, before you give the gifts, you have to have a parsha that tells you how to make sure what you own before you give it, what you own should be kosher to begin with. In other words, what's mine? What's my money? How can I give something for the building of this Mishkan, this holy thing? How can I give something if I'm not sure that what I own is mine? What is private property? What is personal property? What is that? Who decides that? And the answer is every country in the world, every civilization has tort law, has these kinds of civil cases. But as we discussed last week, the Torah's laws are holy and they cover every area of life. So before we discuss this mystical creation of a physical structure that's somehow going to be holy, before we get to that point, we have to make sure that the gifts we're giving have been blessed. They're acceptable. If we know, for instance, that ein mitzvah b'dvar avera, you can't steal money like Robin Hood and then give it to tzedakah. Robin Hood's not a great example in that story, which is mythical, if anything, if it was at all true. Certainly, Robin Hood stole from people who were stealing the money to begin with. It's a whole long story. I'm not going to get into that. So it's not like nowadays where if somebody, like for instance, steals from the government, doesn't pay their taxes, which Rav Moshe Feinstein was aghast at the idea when he was asked, is it okay to do that? He said, how could somebody steal from such a great country? But aside from all that, if somebody steals from the government and then justifies it by then giving some of that money to charity, that's not acceptable. That's not ethical. You can't do that. So we have here, so the Beit Halevi gives the example, for example, amongst many examples, lulav hagazol pasul mishum mitzvah haba be'avera. Even a stolen lulav you can't use because it's stolen. It's not, the lulav doesn't exist. It's like it's not real. So money you give to the Mishkan, if you did not earn it in a kosher way, that money doesn't exist. It's not yours to give. It's not real. It's imaginary money. It's monopoly money. Don't cheat a monopoly either, but it's not as serious as cheating in real life, right? So, but that's the idea, that we want to have just like it's not a coincidence. Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, Baba Batra, those Mesechtot, the Baba Mesechtot, those deal with this kind of tort law, as I said before. And it's not a coincidence that in the Mishnayot there, that's where you have the Mishnayot of Pirkei Avot. That's where you have the laws, how to deal, how to interact with other people. We need to have that there before we get into how to deal with that money. Right? So in other words, first we need to know how to how to earn money in a kosher way. And once that money is kosher, now we can spend it on kosher things like building the Mishkan. Okay. With that said, let's continue. So that's the Beit HaLevi. He's not alone in this idea, and there's actually a Chomat Anoch from the Chida. So he points this out. It's very interesting, just little cute thing. Lefi pshuto efshar l'romez ki hatruma otiot hamutar. You can a little hint to this idea in the very word truma. In the very word truma, if you take the hey and you mix around the letters of the words truma, which is taf, resh, vav, mem, and hey, it's the same letters as hamutar. In other words, what's permitted, what's permissible. You can only give truma from what's permissible, from what you were allowed to earn. Okay, so that's how we're going to get started on this. And now we're going to have another comment from Rav Moshe David Valeh, who was a teacher, then a student of the Ramchal, and he has a comment about the symbolism of the materials used for the Mishkan. So first of all, from our pasuk, "V'zot hatruma asher tikhu mi'itam," right? So from the words asher tikhu mi'itam, you have the words atem. In other words, you. In other words, the truma, and actually the whole Mishkan that we're going to build from this truma is symbolic of atem, of you plural. How? Because we know, the Kabbalists write, that there is before we get to the Kabbalists, we know that there's a great big universe out there. It's huge and it's immeasurable and it's hard to describe. As many of you know, today is a very auspicious day besides it being Zayin Adar now. This earlier today at 3:55 or so Eastern time, which is 6:55 our time, the Mars rover, not the rover, a Mars rover has landed on Mars. It's a very big deal in terms of space travel. There's a very good possibility that within our lifetimes, human beings will be able to travel to Mars. This Mars this machine that landed on Mars today took off from Earth about 8 months ago, which is, I mean, it's a long time, don't get me wrong, but a human being in that size machine could theoretically survive on with certain technological and dietary restrictions, obviously. That's amazing, right? Aside from everything else that we're going to learn about Mars in the coming days. But basically, my point is, it's a huge universe. It's exciting times to be learning about this. Also huge and also amazing is the human body. And Chazal and the Kabbalists mention that the human body is, in a sense, a sort of microcosm of the universe. And the Mishkan is symbolic of the human body. And there's a lot of details, and of course, Moshe David Valeh goes into some detail here in Hebrew. I don't know if we're going to cover all of what he says, but understand that all of the kalim and all of the shapes and everything that's in the Mishkan can be somehow symbolizing the human body. And it's not a coincidence, not a mistake. There's a reason for this, and that is that we are supposed to be able to learn and get closer to Hashem through the universe. Now, the universe might be too large, too expansive for many of us to actually get something real and concrete about Hashem. So we can think about our bodies. Our bodies are right here in front of us, right? We can think about it and be amazed at how the human body works. And there used to be a time when the Jewish people had a place they could go to where they could feel that holiness, feel that closeness to Hashem that we can feel if we think about our bodies and think about how amazing they are. If we can think about the universe and how amazing it is. But there was a place you could go called the Mishkan, and then the Beit HaMikdash, where we could go, where we could feel that closeness to Hashem, and we could experience that in the construction of this Mishkan. The very construction, the very kalim in this Mishkan could remind us of that. So David Moshe Vallée writes that besides the clear, and by the way, other people write about this as well. Like I said, Rav Samson Raphael Hirsch has an entire essay on this in his commentary on Truma. He goes on and on about all of the symbolism and the colors and everything. So let's look, for instance, you might have studied before in the past that in the medieval times there was this concept of the four humors. In other words, the human body has certain different colored liquids that it runs on, and those liquids somehow affect our behavior. So blood is red, and there's phlegm, and there's bile, which is green, and there's black bile, and those things come from different body parts, and they basically have an influence on how the human body interacts with the world. That was a medieval philosophical idea, and many of our Chazal as well write about this. And so what he writes is that the four colored materials that were donated to the Mishkan, we have turquoise, purple, scarlet, and linen, correspond to those four humors, right? There's the blood, there's the yellow bile and black bile, and there's the phlegm. So because just as a person is comprised of these of four elements of skin, flesh, sinews, and bone, the Mishkan was comprised of basically four different types of things. Wood, which the wooden parts correspond to the bones, right? Three lower coverings are basically correspond to sinews, flesh, and skin, and the fourth and final covering corresponds to the clothing which is placed upon the body. So just like the Mishkan was covered, the body is covered. So all of these things that were donated have some sort of correspondence, and all these materials have some sort of correspondence with the human body. And that's a little bit, I know, deep for some of us, but again, it doesn't have to be so deep. Just think about what we're saying. We're saying that everything in this world is supposed to inspire us to come closer to Hashem. Just like some people feel inspired when they go to the kotel, or what people feel inspired when they go to a synagogue, or get inspired when they go to a place where they were inspired before for whatever reason, the Grand Canyon, or some other amazing construction or physical location. Either way, that inspiration is something that Hashem wants us to have, and creates this closeness between us and Him, where we realize that He's the creator, He's the great builder of our world. And that's what the Mishkan was supposed to do. That's what it did. People were inspired when they went there, and that's what everything that happened in the Mishkan, all the sacrifices and all the clothing and all the actions and behaviors and all the rules about what can and can't be done there, all of that was meant to create a holy space, a holy makom, and that's what that was the idea there. One of the do I have that here? Okay, I don't have the pasuk here. Okay, so let's look it up elsewhere. So I don't have it in the source sheet. I apologize, but the next pasuk I wanted to study with you is chapter 25, verse 5. Right? Okay. I wish I could find things easily. Okay, there we go. There's a different system of organization here. So, yeah, verse 5. So, verse 5 says that orot elim madanim orot chashim v'atzei shitim. One of the things that was donated was amongst other things was the skin or the hide of a tachash, a tachash. So the Tachashim. So what are Tachashim? So there's a lot of different opinions about what they were. According to most opinions, it's an animal that perhaps no longer exists. It's perhaps either very endangered and hard to find, or altogether has become extinct. Either way, the Gemara talks about the Tachash and mentions, and this is a Gemara in towards the beginning of the Masechta Shabbat, 28b. My have ale the Tachash dehaya b'mei Moshe. What can we learn about the Tachash that existed in the time of Moshe? So of course the discussion really is the Tachash a kosher animal to eat? And one of the issues is that if it was kosher to eat, if it was if it was used for a mitzvah purpose, in general, we want things that are used for mitzvah purposes to be, especially if the animal, to be things that are kosher, edible, technically. Not that we should eat it, but because we want to use the entire animal, we don't want to just kill an animal, take its hide, and then use it for our purposes. We want to be able to use the animal in whole and use every part of the animal, including its meat, for holy purposes. So that's the idea that sort of prefaces this question. So Amar Rabbi Allah, Amar Rabbi Shimon, so Ben Lakish, so that he's going to say what his opinion is about this Tachash. Omar Haya Rabbi Meir. They quote Rabbi Meir. Moshe Bria Mipnei Atzma. It was the animal that was a Tachash in the days of Moshe was a unique animal. It was not something that we're used to. Bimplei Atzma Haya. V'lo hichriu bo chachamim min chayahu. And the rabbis don't know or did not make a final conclusion what kind of a creature it was. Imin behemahu, if it was a chaya or a behema, in other words, if it was a wild animal or a domesticated animal. But here's one thing that they did know: the keren achat hayta lo b'mitzcho. It had a one horn growing out of the top of its head. Nizdamem lo l'Moshe v'asam imenu Mishkan v'nignaz. So it had a horn, and when the Tachash, when the Mishkan was being built, it came to Moshe by itself, and Moshe made this tabernacle cover from its hide. All right, and it is no longer available. So according to the Gemara, even in the time of Chazal, already we're talking about 1,500 years ago, it was already extinct then, or hard to find, whichever way you want to put it. Either way. So the Ben Yehoyada, about 100 some years ago, about 150 years ago, writes, so this is the Ben Ish Chai in his commentary on the Gemara. So he writes there that we can, and by the way, he has a running commentary throughout the Gemara that actually learns out lessons that can be learned from these otherwise rather cryptic passages in the Gemara. So the Talmud there said that this animal had a horn growing out of the middle of its head. What can that teach us? asks the Ben Ish Chai. Very important. He writes, we know, and this is something that connects very nicely to something we've been learning from Rav Munk in Ascent to Harmony. We know that there are two sides to things. Mora al kav harachamim shehu atzmai, sheyora al din, umotek shehu mitkayim, lechein ko atzmi shalom. So we know that there is a concept of din on one side, on the right side. We know there's a concept on the left side. We know that there's a concept of chesed on the right side. Right? So we've got this thing. We've got din. We've got chesed. We've got justice, strict justice. What is the law? Just the facts, ma'am. And on the other side, we have this kindness. Well, let's be reasonable. Let's think this through. Let's be nice as somebody. And then we've talked about how if in the regular court case, a poor person steals from a rich person, the law is the poor person stole. Doesn't matter if he's poor. He stole. He broke the law. He should be punished. The full extent of the law. But Chesed says, okay, so punish him. But after the court case, give him some money on his way out of the courtroom. You know, there's this balance we have to have. And that, says the Ben Ish Chai, is what it means that the Tachash had a horn in the middle of his head. In the middle of its head, there was a horn, which means you need to have a balance. You need to have tiferet. You need to ascend. You need to ascend to harmony. You can have din, you can have chesed, but you need to marry the two together. There needs to be a balance, and the balance is the focus, and the focus is the middle. And that's why the Tachash covers the Mishkan. The Mishkan, which is the place where we find Hashem, where we feel Hashem's presence more than anywhere else. There you need to know that the focus of life has to be tiferet. It needs to be harmony. You can't be too much stringency. You can't have too much kindness. You need to have a balance of the two. This is a great time of the year to be learning about this, because amongst other things, we're going to be reading Parshat Zachor. And why do we read Parshat Zachor this time of the year? It's because it's right before Purim. And Purim is the time when we remember that Haman, who comes from Amalek, is an Agagi, which means he's descendant of Agag. Who was Agag? Agag was the last king of Amalek. And what happened to Agag? Why was he not killed when Shaul was supposed to kill? Shmuel told Shaul to kill off Amalek, and Shaul did not. He killed off everybody except Agag. He left Agag alive. Why did he do that? He said it's not nice to kill a king. That's not how civilized people do things. You don't kill off a king. You put him in prison. You parade him around. You embarrass him. That's fine, but you don't kill him outright. That's not how you treat kings. So if that's the case, so he was right. Correct? Not a problem. He was told by Shmuel to kill out Amalek, every single one of Amalek. That was the point of having a king in Israel, is to fulfill the mitzvah of killing out Amalek. But Shaul did not. Shmuel then criticizes him for it. And in the time that he's criticizing him, somehow Agag had the opportunity to impregnate somebody. And he basically continued the Amalekite people, leading to Haman, leading to then the whole entire threat of extinction that the Jewish people faced in Purim, and of course other times that Amalek poked its ugly head in Jewish history, trying to kill off the Jewish people, all of which happened because indeed Shaul decided to be nice and not kill off Amalek when he had the opportunity. So that's called misplaced kindness, is another way of saying that. Shaul had the opportunity. He almost killed out Amalek, and then because he felt it didn't feel right killing off a king, so he didn't. And then Agag had the opportunity to continue the Amalekite people that way, even though he himself would later be killed pretty gruesomely. But nevertheless, this is something that's why we remember Amalek, and that's one of the lessons here, is that you need to have a balance. You can't be too kind. It's cruel to be kind, as the old song used to say. Right? And it's also, you can't be too cruel either. You need to have a balance between this meanness. And by the way, we know the Jewish people have a national sort of character of being Rahmanim, of having Rahmanut, of being of caring about people, and there's something very beautiful about that. But there's also weakness in that, and we need to sometimes be a little stronger about these things. God forbid somebody's coming to threaten you, to hurt you in some way. That's not the time to appease them. You can try, if all else fails, you have to defend yourself. That's it's a difficult thing, like I said, but it's a very important part of not only Jewish history but also our behavior, personal lives. Okay. All right. Next question might seem like a very strange question, but we're going to skip a few psukim to the next group of materials. By the way, we're going to focus a lot. I don't know, I haven't mentioned it yet, but we've been focusing a lot on chapter 25 of the very, very beginning of Parshat Truma, and that's okay. There's a lot to say about it, and we're barely skimming the surface as usual. But God willing, in future years, we'll learn more about the beautiful kelim of the Mishkan. Also, of course, we have Parshat Vayakel and Pekude, when we'll also be able to, God willing, revisit the Mishkan. Also, next week's Parsha of Tetzaveh. All right. Anyway, so chapter 25, verse 7. Again, more materials. It says Avnei Shoham, Avnei Miluim, ve'efod v'lachoshen. So the Sefaria and many others translate Avnei Shoham as lapis lazuli, and Avnei Miluim are setting stones that were going to be placed in the Choshen, which the Kohen wore, like so, and ephod v'lachoshen. So it would be put in the ephod, and it would be placed on the breastplate. Yeah. So, like so. So the Or HaChaim HaKadosh. So he has an interesting question. So I know we skipped a few psukim, but trust me when I say we had other materials, and some of those materials were very costly. And the Or HaChaim wants to know, if the materials are listed in descending order of value, and they certainly seem to be, why are these stones, lapis lazuli, and the stones used for the ephod, why are they mentioned last? Tzarech l'dat lama katav avnei shoham ve'avnei miluim b'seder achar kol yud aleph minim min harui haya lo l'sdara kodem zahav v'chesef. They should be they're great. They're like gold and silver. The gold and silver should have been mentioned. Last of all. They're how valuable are they? These stones are precious. They're on the ephod. Why are they mentioned last? So he says an interesting answer. He quotes from the Midrash in Bamidbar Rabbah, chapter 7, 10, Perak Yud Bet, it says here. Anyway, that Hashem brought these stones from heaven, right? Basically, Hashem was so upset with these stones, which were brought. Some of these stones were brought by the princes as their gifts for the Mishkan. So Hashem was upset with the princes for deciding. We'll get to this when we get to Parshat Naso, but the God willing, the Hashem is so upset with the princes for waiting to be the last to bring these gifts. It was sort of like a catch-up, right? They brought the things that they thought nobody else would bring. So Hashem was so upset with them that he made sure that they would come from heaven. So that's why, according to the Orach Chaim, that these are mentioned last, because they're really, in a sense, they're sort of a punishment. Of course, it's good that they brought them, but that they brought them so late is a problem. Chaim Shmulevitz, Zecher Tzadok Levracha, great mashgiach of the Mir Yeshiva. So he asks the question in Sichot Musar, and he brings this up. Actually, I noticed he brings this up at least twice, but so I'm quoting here the first time that he brings it. He's talking about an interesting concept here. How can we use this for our own purposes? What can we learn from this? These stones that were brought from heaven are mentioned last because they're kind of a punishment, really, that Hashem had to bring them from heaven because these princes weren't aggressive enough in bringing their sacrifices as early as they could. So the Rav Chaim Shmulevitz points out that this doesn't really affect their value. That they came from heaven should make them more valuable, right? They came from heaven. These are heavenly stones, whatever that means. They came down, there's blue lights surrounding it. It's like so there's probably, sounds and lights, and there's a whole procession, angels bringing them. We don't know how they came down, right? But it's heavenly. So these stones should be more valuable. So they shouldn't be mentioned last. They should be mentioned first. Even more valuable. So he writes, you know why these are mentioned last? Because nobody worked to get them. Nobody put any effort into this. Like I said, they came from heaven. They came from heaven. That means nobody had to dig for them. There's no child labor in the mines of Africa to get these stones. These stones, these are not bloodstones. These stones, nobody had to work for. Nobody earned. Nobody worked hard for them. Nobody mined them. Nobody chiseled them. These came down from heaven. And value, my friends, is something that's earned. Something that you work for is worth more to you than something that came to you for free. Many verses in Mishlei and other places, many lines in Chazal tell us that we are not supposed to be so accepting of gifts. Gifts are not a good thing in Jewish thought, usually. Purim is an exception, but in general, we want to earn what we get. We want to work hard for it. We have supposed to have a good, strong work ethic, and when we earn what we get, we feel better about it. It's something that's that tastes better. We've mentioned, I think when we were learning Parshat Noach, that the bitter olive tree that the dove brings is supposed to be reminiscent of this same idea that it's bitter because it wasn't worked for. It was already laying there. It wasn't anybody's to buy or sell. It was just there. It didn't take much effort to bring it, and so therefore it's bitter. We want the sweetness of something that's earned through hard work is much more valuable. Very important concept, brought to you by Rav Chaim Shmulevitz. All right, this next This next thought, um, yeah, this next idea, we have two more comments. I hope we have time for them. This next idea comes from the Baal Hathurim. So the famous Tur who wrote one of our first, not first, but one of our, the classic compendium of Jewish law that's basically, whose system is used by almost everybody who comes after him. Shulchan Aruch uses the same system, the same numbering system, so it's easy to reference law. So it comes from the Tur. So he wrote a commentary on the Torah called the Baal Hathurim, or that's how we call it. That's not what I'm going to quote to you from right now. I'm quoting to you from the Kitzur Baal Hathurim. So what's famously in many Chumashim and has been quoted in the past, that's called the Baal Hathurim, is actually his shortened version of the same work. He shortened it himself and basically cut it down to just the cutesy stuff, the gematrias, the numerical values of things, the Rosh Tevot, the acronyms that can be found, the different codes that can be found in the Torah, different times that certain unique words or phrases are used more than once, etc., etc. So he's bothered by a question on this next verse that we're going to study. Chapter 25, verse 10 says, Va'asu Aron. So he's talking about the Aron, the actual, the ark, right? The ark that Dr. Jones found. Kidding, he didn't really find it. So that's fiction. The ark is nonfiction. So the ark, if I can find a good picture of it. So there's some pictures of the ark from this wonderful book. Right. I have a look at something like this. Sorry, hitting the microphone is not a good idea. Sorry for those of you using a headphones. Okay, so yeah, and on top of the ark were the Chruvim, these sort of angelic, baby-faced angels with the wings spread upward. Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot more details, as I said, but anyway, it says here, Asu Aron Atzei Shitim. This Aron has to be made of acacia wood, of Atzei of Shitim, acacia, and a Matayim V'chetzi Arko. The length is 2.5 amot, which are cubits. We've said before that an amma is approximately 2 feet, let's say, give or take. Just for simplicity's sake, amma v'chetzi arko, and so and a cubit and a half its width. Right, so that's 3 feet width, and oh gosh, now I have to do the math now that I've started. So 2 times 2 is 4, right? So 5 feet its length. Thank you. 5 by 3. Right, good. And a cubit and a half its height, so that's it. So its height is also about 3 feet. So 5 by 3 by 3, approximately feet wise. Okay, that's how big it is. Not so big. Think about it. It's basically the length and height of a modern table, or more or less a 5-foot table. Anyway. Okay. Anyway, so. But what's very interesting about the Aron, and this is unique amongst the Kelim, is that it says, as you've noticed, 2.5 cubits, 1.5 cubits, another cubit and a half. Why half? Over and over again, we've got halves. So, Vasu Aron v'chulam k'tiv v'asit chutz Aron k'tiv asu. Sorry, that's not his question. Aron otiot Oren. That's not the question. Let's see what we're getting to. Yes. So later on, so towards the bottom here, it says Amatayim v'chetzi arko v'ama v'chetzi rachbo v'ama v'chetzi komato. So he quotes our pasuk, Kol midotav. All of these measurements hayu shvurim. They are b'chetzi amot. So they're all in halves. Why is that? Lelamed, it's to teach you shekol mi shalomed Torah. Anybody who learns Torah, Tzarech l'shaver Lahashfil atzmo. He should always be halved. What does that mean? So he always has to be humble, right? And always has to think of himself as incomplete. He or she, whoever is learning Torah, needs to think of themselves as if they are incomplete. Okay? What does that mean? How do we learn that from this? So what's the Aron? The Aron houses the luchot, and either housed or somehow contained the original Sefer Torah that Moshe wrote. So the symbol of the Aron, what it symbolizes is Torah. Right? It had the luchot, fit in nice and snug inside, and possibly the Torah fit inside or was on the outside and hanging on to it, whatever. We're not going to get into that right now, maybe a future year. But either way, that Sefer Torah, that scroll that Moshe wrote, and those stones, they are the Torah. They are the written Torah. That's what that's symbolized. We'll see if that's the case, then somebody who studies Torah needs to be a container that's in halves. We who learn Torah need to realize we don't know everything, and we need to be humble. The more you know, the less you know. The more you realize you don't know. Right? Torah is vast. It's a whole sea of Torah. So many commentaries, so many halachot, so many details. What I said right now might be new to some of us. It might be new information for me. It might be new information for you. And there's plenty more where that came from. Plenty of Torah that we're not studying this week, in this year in Truma, that God willing we'll get to in future years. That's just Truma. That's just the first 10 psukim that we've studied so far. And there's so much more to study. And we've skipped a lot of psukim. It's vast. Torah is amazing. It's beautiful. And we need to be humble when we study Torah. We need to realize we don't know it all, and there's so much more to learn. And if we're not humble, we'll get into the habit of people who perhaps aren't at this class right now because they're thinking, what else could I learn about Truma? I learned Truma already. I'm going to see it in the Parsha. I'm going to hear it in Shul. I'm going to read it in the Chumash. I know it enough. There's no such thing. The greatest Talmidei Chachamim I've ever met, I saw studying the Parsha every morning. Shnayim Mikra ve'echa Targum, learning the Parsha twice in Hebrew and once in English and commentary or whatever. That is done by the greatest tzaddikim, the greatest Torah minds who already have the whole Torah seemingly memorized. They're still learning the Parsha just like they did when they were children. Same melody. Because that's how we learn Torah, is with humility. Just as an idea of how vast Torah is, I have a comment here I'd like to share from the Vilna Gaon, who on the same Parsha quotes a Gemara. So let's look at the Gemara real quick. Amar Cheskia, Menayim Shekol HaMosif Gora Shenamar. So there's a concept in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Chaf Tet Amud Aleph, towards the beginning. About 28 pages into it. So there's a concept in the Gemara in Sanhedrin that if you add, you're actually taking away, which has a lot to do with a concept we have in the Torah. That we have in the Torah, that not to add, to not be Baal Tosif, to add to the Torah. You can't subtract from the Torah. You can't add to the Torah. Why can't you? If I understand why I can't take away from the Torah. It's holy. It's given by God. I can't take away from that. Why can't I add to it? Because it's holy. It's given by God. But adding to it, you're taking away something from it. So on that conversation, the Gemara says that we have proof in the Torah that if you add something, you're actually taking away. One of the opinions comes from Bereshit, where it says Amar Elokim lo tochelu. Hashem said, "You shall not eat Mimena, from the tree of knowledge, and then Chava added v'lo tegubo. You can't touch it. Hashem didn't say that. You added that, and by adding that, we talked about this before. The snake convinced Chava to eat from the tree. Oh, you can touch it after all, can't you? Oh, yeah, you can touch it. Oh, well, if you can touch it, then you can eat it. You can eat from it. So that's why she ate from it. So Rav Masharshia Amar, no, you learn it from this other pasuk. He brings our pasuk Shemot Chaf Hey pasuk Yud Amatayim v'chetzi arko, an amma and a half shall be its length. How does that prove you can't add to the Torah? How does adding to the Torah take away from the Torah? So writes the Vilna Gaon, and here are his holy words. The Gemara, the Masechet Sanhedrin quotes our Gemara, and he says that Shekol Hamosif Gora, that anybody who adds actually takes away, and this Amatayim V'chetzi Arko, an amma and a half is its length, is the proof for that. He quotes Rashi, who says it has to do with the Aleph. He quotes the Maharsha, who says it has to, who explains the Aleph in a different way, and then he gives another explanation. He says like this: What happens when you add this vav and to the pasuk? Right? So he says, so yeah, so each orech is dalet amot. All right, sorry. Im nigra havav. If you add a vav, shall tevat v'chetzi. If you take out that vav, become amatayim v'chetzi arko, and you read that amatayim chetzi arko, that amatayim would be translated without the vav. It would translate as amatayim. 2 is half of the arko. 2 is half of the length, which means the length is not 2; it's twice that, which is 4. Right? Imkeni yemashma de koha orach hayad dalet amot. Then the length of each thing is 4 amot, which is twice what it should be, almost. Very be'emet lo hutzrech liyot koha orach ele rak shtei umot amot v'chetzi. So it's supposed to be 2 amot, amatayim v'chetzi, and a half, not amatayim chetzi. Not that amatayim is chetzi. Right? So that's a big difference. So that one little vav, taking that away, destroys the entire meaning of the pasuk. Each letter in the Torah is like that. It's invaluable. It has unlimited value, because indeed the Torah is holy that way. It cannot be taken away from. It can't be added to, because what we have is a holy text written by Hashem, given to us, where we're supposed to learn important, valuable lessons about how to be humble and about how to create an aura of Kedusha in our lives, just like the Mishkan was. And with that, I'm going to pause the recording, or stop the recording, and stop